Mr. Alejandro was a 60-year-old billionaire businessman who had built his empire with hard work, sacrifice, and a bit of luck. He lived in a massive mansion outside the city, surrounded by luxuries most people only dreamt of. Yet, his days were marked by a lonely routine, endless meetings, shallow parties, and employees who came and went without leaving any emotional trace. To Alejandro, his staff were like furniture, useful but invisible. Among them was Javier, a young quiet gardener who cared for the roses, hedges, and lawns with remarkable dedication. Alejandro had never paid him any mind until one day something changed. As Javier finished his shift, Alejandro noticed him staring at an old wristwatch, his face filled with deep sadness. That image stuck with Alejandro. Curiosity grew. Why did someone so diligent, who never asked for anything, carry such sorrow? Days later, Alejandro watched from behind his curtains as Javier mounted an old bike and pedaled away with determination. Almost playfully, Alejandro asked his chauffeur to follow him. He didn't know what he was hoping to find. Maybe a break from his empty routine. Maybe something more. As they followed, the city transformed. Elegant avenues turned to narrow streets. Sidewalks cracked. Walls were covered in graffiti. But Javier moved with ease, greeting neighbors with warm familiarity, smiles Alejandro rarely saw in his world of masks. Eventually, Javier stopped at a modest house surrounded by potted plants. Alejandro's breath caught as a small girl ran into Javier's arms, giggling as he spun her around. A tired woman smiled from the doorway. In that moment, Alejandro realized this wasn't just a gardener. This was a father, a provider, a man with a story. From the car, Alejandro watched the family. They shared a humble meal at a small table, no silverware, no luxury, just warmth. It shook Alejandro. He, who dined with the richest, had never felt what that small home radiated: joy, connection, love. Then Javier stepped out again, with a bag of leftover food for an elderly woman waiting nearby. She hugged him, and he gently patted her shoulder. Alejandro turned away, ashamed. This man gave what little he had, while Alejandro had refused countless donation requests over the years. Inside, Javier strummed a worn guitar for his daughter. The song drifted into the night, a lullaby of hope. Alejandro leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, something cracked inside him. He realized his money could never buy what Javier had: purpose. Alejandro sat in the back seat of his car, shaken. The night had opened his eyes in ways he hadn't expected. For the first time, he was forced to reflect on all the missed opportunities, the people he never truly saw, the lives he could have changed but ignored. He thought of his employees, those anonymous faces who came and went through his offices. He remembered the charitable projects he had rejected out of apathy or pride. And a quiet, unsettling truth began to emerge. True wealth had little to do with numbers and more to do with human connection. This realization disturbed him, but it also brought an odd sense of peace, as if finally he was viewing his life through the right lens. He knew something in him had shifted, and that nothing would ever be quite the same. Unable to resist, he stepped out of the car, much to his driver, Mario's surprise. He walked a few steps and hid behind a tree, watching Javier fix the neighbor's door. What was he doing, spying on a humble man's life? And yet something inside urged him to stay. As Javier refused to tip and instead asked the neighbor to care for his sick dog over the weekend, Alejandro felt a deep pang in his chest. Every selfless gesture was a mirror reflecting how far he'd strayed from genuine kindness. Overwhelmed, he sat on a nearby bench, staring at his expensive wristwatch. It once symbolized power and prestige. Now it felt hollow, meaningless. When had he stopped valuing the simple things? As he sat lost in thought, children ran by, playing with a worn-out ball. One boy stumbled near him, and Alejandro instinctively helped him up. The child smiled, a pure, spontaneous smile that pierced straight through Alejandro's hardened exterior. It was just a moment, but in that fleeting exchange, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Tenderness. Back in the car, Mario looked at him with concern, but Alejandro simply raised a hand. "Let's go for a drive," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. As they drove through the city, Alejandro no longer saw investments or real estate. He saw people. He wondered if he still had time to change, if he could reclaim the man he once dreamed of becoming. That night was not the end of anything. It was the beginning. Returning to his mansion, he walked through its marble halls and grand galleries, but they felt cold now, distant. He paused by a window overlooking the garden where Javier worked every morning. In the moonlight, Alejandro finally allowed himself to reflect. This wasn't just about charity or image. It was about confronting his own emptiness, his own cracks that no wealth could mend. In the quiet of that night, he picked up his phone and began searching for community projects, foundations, and ways to get involved. But quickly, he realized this wasn't about writing checks or adding his name to donor lists. It had to come from the heart. He thought of Javier's daughter laughing, of the sick neighbor, of Javier's wife. His heart ached, long dormant, now waking up. He grabbed a notebook he hadn't used since his youth and began writing. Memories, thoughts, ideas. He rediscovered a voice he'd long forgotten, his own. Before bed, he looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back seemed unfamiliar, still dressed in wealth, but softer, more human. He whispered something he hadn't expected to say. "Thank you, Javier." The next morning, Alejandro rose early, before sunrise. For the first time in years, he didn't delegate. He went to the garden where Javier was already tending the roses. Javier looked up, startled. Alejandro greeted him, then asked if they could talk. He wanted to know about Javier's life, his family, his struggles. Javier spoke honestly about his wife's illness, the financial burden, and how joy came from small moments. Alejandro listened, as if each word chipped away at the armor around his heart. Then he invited Javier into his office, surrounded by million-dollar contracts. There, Alejandro offered to pay for the surgery Javier's wife needed and cover his daughter's education. At first, Javier refused, but Alejandro insisted it wasn't charity. It was gratitude. Helping Javier, he explained, was a small first step to healing years of cold indifference. Javier, with tears in his eyes, accepted. In that moment, a bond formed, one deeper than employer and employee. It was friendship born from humility and recognition. From that day, Alejandro's life transformed. He contacted local foundations, started community projects, and most importantly, included all his employees, from the highest to the humblest, in his mission. He visited schools and hospitals, always with Javier by his side, learning what truly mattered. Eventually, Alejandro shared his story publicly, encouraging other business owners to get involved beyond money. People were skeptical at first, thinking it was PR. But over time, his consistency proved them wrong. Alejandro had changed, and this time, for good. Alejandro no arrived with cameras or journalists, just rolled up sleeves and a willingness to listen. At first, the community greeted him with cautious smiles, but those soon turned into genuine embraces. One of the most touching moments was the opening of a small community library, partially funded by Alejandro. Surrounded by children thanking him, he knelt to speak with them, something the old Alejandro would never have done. Javier had become more than a gardener. He was now a bridge between two worlds, the hardworking and the privileged. To Alejandro, he became a mentor in humanity, teaching him the value of empathy and commitment without even trying. The change didn't go unnoticed. Alejandro's employees, once invisible in his eyes, began to experience a more human, respectful work environment. Meetings in the mansion evolved into discussions about how to make a real difference in the city. He realized that leadership wasn't about power. It was about inspiration. Grand dinners became simple gatherings with employees and neighbors where ideas and dreams were shared freely. The millionaire who once followed his gardener out of curiosity had now found the purpose he'd been missing his whole life. He started spending weekends visiting schools, supporting young entrepreneurs, and quietly building community programs. And although the media wanted to spotlight him, Alejandro refused the attention. He didn't want to be a symbol, just a silent example. Javier and Alejandro's friendship deepened. The once distant boss was now Uncle Alejandro to Javier's daughter, a welcome guest in a humble but loving home. Alejandro rediscovered a part of himself he had long buried, the ability to feel, to laugh, to belong. One day, he stood alone in his garden, touching the petals of the rose bush Javier cared for. For the first time in years, tears filled his eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. The man he once overlooked had become the greatest gift life ever gave him. And that's how the once lonely millionaire became a fulfilled man, surrounded by bonds that no amount of money could buy. His story spread, inspiring others. But Alejandro rejected awards and headlines. When asked what had changed him, he would simply smile and say, "I learned to see with different eyes." His legacy wasn't in empires, it was in lives changed. Today, if you visit the neighborhood where it all began, you'll see a plaque that doesn't list numbers or titles. It reads, "Here began a story of hope to inspire all who pass by." Alejandro no longer needed recognition. He had found peace. And thanks to an unexpected friendship, he left behind a lasting reminder. It's never too late to change, to heal, and to help build a better world.